I worked as a security guard at a large hotel in Las Vegas during my late 20s. It paid way better than pretty much any other job nearby that I was actually qualified for. But the most annoying part about it was the scheduling and the staff. At the time, the building was having trouble with a lack of staff to cover shifts, so my schedule would be mornings, evenings, or overnights, all randomly throughout the week. It made it really hard to even sleep sometimes. But again, I liked the money. Anyways, I was working a late evening shift this night and was at the front desk talking to two of my coworkers. It was around 11 and my shift ended at 12, so we were just passing the time. In the middle of our conversation, the phone rang on the desk that I was leaning on. Checking the number, it was from one of the rooms in the hotel, so I picked it up and asked how I could help them. A man spoke saying that there was something going on in one of the rooms down the hall and that he was really worried about it. I asked him what he meant, and he frantically responded, telling me to come up quick because he was getting really nervous. I checked the room number on the phone, then told him I would send security up as soon as possible. Of course, though, I was just referring to myself. When I put the phone down, I quickly explained the strange nature of the call to my coworkers, then headed to the elevators and went to the mid-level floor where the caller's room was located. Walking down the hallway, there was a strange sense of absolute silence. I expected to hear whatever the caller was talking about, but there were no loud noises coming from anywhere on the floor. I also kind of expected the caller to have been standing by their door waiting for me or something, but the door was closed. I knocked on the door loudly, announcing that it was hotel security. I didn't hear any movement or sounds coming from the room at all, and after a minute of no answer, I walked down to the end of the hallway, listening intently for anything unusual, then continued back to the door, knocking again. A few moments later, though, the room behind me opened their door, and an older woman asked if I was security. I said yes and asked if they knew anything about a strange noise or the caller from the room, to which they replied that they had heard loud noises traveling through the hallway a few minutes ago, but were unsure what it was. From their voice and facial expressions, they seemed really terrified. At this point, I was already starting to get really nervous, but things only got stranger. I grabbed my walkie and radioed down to the front desk, asking them to call the room again and let me know if they answered. After a little bit, they replied that nobody answered. I stood there for a moment, trying to think of what to do before radioing back down to them. I told them to check who was staying in the room. After waiting for what felt like forever, they finally got back to me, saying that nobody had the room booked for tonight. Even more confused, I took out my security key card and opened the door, since nobody was supposed to be there. The room looked clean and unused as far as I could tell. I searched every corner and found basically nothing, but then I walked over to the phone. I turned it over and got the serial number on it. Then I went back down to the lobby where my desk was, and I checked the security records for timestamps of calls that had been made from that room. Sure enough, there was a record of an active call having been made from this room to the front desk, the one that I had answered about 15 minutes ago. Obviously, the hotel didn't record the calls or anything, so all I was able to confirm was that someone was in that vacant room without permission. This ended up becoming a bigger investigation over the coming days. As the next morning, one of the guests staying in a room on that same floor was reported missing by a family member that was staying in a separate room. The security footage of all the entrances and exits was reviewed, and the missing person was last seen leaving the hotel alone a couple of hours prior to the call that I had received. It's still unclear if the two incidents were connected or not, but it's definitely a really strange situation. I don't know how the caller got access to that phone or who they were, but personally, I believe that the reason they called seemed to add up with someone getting forcefully kidnapped based on their brief description. The person behind the mystery call was never identified, and as of right now, the missing person still has not been found. During a road trip I was passing through Ohio. It was around that time I was starting to get sleepy behind the wheel, so I stopped in a small town called Xenia. I looked for a hotel or motel and found this place called Xenia Country Inn. It looked a little run down, but so did this whole town if I'm being honest. Plus, all I needed was a night's sleep, nothing fancy. So I parked in the lot and went to the little front office, which was in the front corner of one of the two buildings to the motel. There was an old man sitting there reading the paper. It was hot in there, and there was a loud buzzing sound from this tabletop fan. I asked for a room, and the man finally looked up from his paper without greeting me and said, "$65." I assumed he meant $65 for the room, so I handed him my credit card. I asked if it was possible to get a corner room, and he simply said no. The customer service here was clearly not something included in the price. The man handed me this old-fashioned key on an otherwise blank key ring. They still didn't use key cards at this place. I walked across the parking lot to my room. The door was actually hard to unlock. I had to shimmy the key a little just to get it to finally turn. Before walking in, I looked around the lot. There were only 2 other cars in the parking lot. It was a ghost town. I stepped into the room, and it smelled like a mix of cotton and vomit. I wondered if I should go back and ask for a different room, but I realized by the look of this place, all the rooms probably smelled. The room was small and had a blue, dirty, worn-out-looking carpet, a couch, a small coffee table, and a bed. I shut the door and tried to lock it, but I was having trouble. More trouble than I did unlocking it. After about 30 seconds of shimmying and almost popping a blood vessel trying to unlock it, I felt I may have broken it. But when I tried opening the door, it wouldn't open. So even though the door wasn't fully locked, as long as the door wouldn't open, that's all that mattered, I figured. I crawled up in the bed, and I heard all the old springs squeaking as my weight pushed into the mattress and the bed frame. I tried putting on the TV, but of course the remote didn't work, so I just crawled under the covers and tried to go to sleep. Then it happened. I nearly jumped out of my own skin when there was one loud thump at the window. I looked at the guy standing outside of it, and he started talking, sounding all hurt and in need of help. He was saying, "Hey, please let me in. I hurt myself. I need help." And he definitely saw me in that bed. I yelled back to go to the front desk. He wouldn't stop, though. There was no way I was opening that door. I had a feeling he was acting, and this was a trap. Eventually, after ignoring him for long enough, he left. I turned to check and confirm, and he was gone. I hadn't realized how truly unsafe this area was. I had to get up and check the lock on the door just to be safe and make sure the door wouldn't open. I gave the door a couple of good pulls, and it didn't open. I then closed the curtains in front of the 2 windows so that he couldn't come back and look in at me again. That shook me up a bit, but the nerves calmed within half an hour, and I was able to fall into a half sleep not too long after. I started having this weird dream where I was in a closed supermarket running from the manager who was chasing me, and at some point during the dream, these clicking sounds started taking over to the point that my whole dream shifted to incorporate these sounds. And then, with that, I was awake. The room was cold for some reason. Then I looked down and realized the blanket was pulled off of me. I sat up to pull it back over me, but then I saw at the foot of the bed, there was this tall figure looming over me. Before I could scream, he went, "Shh," and told me not to move. He told me he wouldn't hurt me if I didn't make any movements or sounds. Then he asked me where my wallet was. I told him it was in my jeans pocket on the floor. All I saw was this figure towering over me in the bed, moving away from the foot of the bed to my jeans on the floor. I heard him wrestling with the jeans, digging through the pocket until he found it. Then he asked what else I had in there. I was just taking a road trip. With that, he didn't say another word and left. I ran to try and relock the door as soon as he left, having the same trouble as earlier. I then called the police, but they were of no immediate assistance. We went to the guy at the front desk, who played back the video footage caught. However, the guy who entered the room was wearing a face mask and a hat, hiding all his features. I got my money back and left. Thank God I didn't have much cash in my wallet. I canceled all my cards and slept in my car. I learned my lesson never to stop at a sketchy motel. This happened to me during a business trip that I took last year for work. I arrived at the hotel and picked up my key to the room, which my company had paid for. It was a nice-looking hotel on the inside, though a bit smaller than most other hotels. There were maybe 30 to 40 rooms total, and only 3 stories. My room was on the top floor, so I took the elevator up and started making my way down the hallway. I put my bags down by the door and reached into my pocket for the room key, but just as I did that, the neighboring room's door opened, and a man stepped into the hall. He greeted me, mentioning that he was my neighbor, and held his hand out, gesturing for a handshake. I confusingly shook it and told him my name. then started making my way into the room. As I walked in, I noticed that he went back into his room as well and shut the door. I thought it was strange that someone would come out of their temporary hotel room just to greet me as their temporary neighbor. But some people are just like that, I guess. I unpacked my small suitcase and duffel bag, then laid on the bed and turned on the TV. It was pretty late already, and I was tired from the flight, so I planned on going to bed early that night. I took a quick shower, then turned off all the lights. I laid there trying to sleep for almost 20 minutes before hearing the neighbor's door creak open, followed by seeing their shadow walk by my door, but they stopped just before they passed my room. Through the sliver of light under the door, I could see their shadow get closer for a second before backing away and continuing down the hall. This obviously creeped me out, so I got up and made sure that all the locks were secured on the door, then went back to bed. The next day, I went to meet my coworkers at a company-owned building where we attended a presentation and had dinner. I didn't get back to the hotel until 10 p.m., and I was really exhausted. I tossed my work bag on the bed and then got in the shower. I was in there for maybe 10 minutes when, through the water splashing, I heard the distinct beep sound of the electronic door lock unlocking. I knew it was too late for it to be the cleaning services, so my mind instantly jumped to the strange man staying in the room next to mine, but I didn't know how he could possibly have a key card that could unlock my door. Not knowing what to do, I stood there silently as I listened to the door slowly open and then close, followed by footsteps walking past the bathroom door. With the shower running, I knew that they had to know that I was in there, which terrified me even more. I tried to quietly step out of the shower as to not alarm them. Then I quietly put on a pair of pants that I had lying on the ground. Making sure to lock it, I leaned my ear up against the bathroom door and listened. I could hear a faint noise sounding like someone was searching through one of my bags. Of course, I wanted to confront them, but for all I knew, they could have a gun or a knife. In the moment, I really just felt helpless and frozen in fear. I had no idea what this guy could want from me, but soon the room went silent. While I didn't have my phone with me, I figured my best bet was to call for help. At the very least, it would hopefully get the guy to run away. I took a deep breath, then started banging on the bathroom door, yelling for help as loud as I could. I could hear the man's frantic footsteps run past the door and back into the hallway. I quickly got out, closed the front door, locking it shut, then ran to the nightstand to get my phone and dialed 911 with my shaky hands. Once they were on their way, I called the front desk to let them know as well. Of course, by the time they got here, the man was already gone, but thankfully, the police found him in his car a few hours later. I'm not sure if he even got any jail time for his actions though, because they couldn't prove his motive to be harmful. I honestly think he was trying to kidnap me or something, though, as I don't know any other reason why he would go into the room when he knew that I was in there. But I guess we'll never know for sure what would have happened. Back when I was 18 and in my senior year of high school, I used to play softball for our school's female softball team. That year specifically, our school was actually really good, and because of that, we were invited to an invitational tournament in Las Vegas. I remember we stayed in a hotel only around 15 minutes from the city itself. It was around 9 p.m. when we got there, and we all sort of divided into our own groups to stay in hotel rooms. And because of that, me and 3 other close friends at the time decided to stay in a room together. Around an hour later, all 4 of us were unpacked and winding down in our room, as our first game of the tournament was scheduled early the next morning. But as I was lying in bed and basically half asleep at this point, the phone to our room rang. It kind of startled us, as I've stayed in many hotels before, and never once remember the hotel phone itself ringing. All of us, now wide awake, looked at each other. We agreed we should answer it and decided I would do it. So I picked up the phone and said the usual hello. Now this was a few years ago, so I don't remember the exact conversation. But on the other end of the phone, a man's almost whispering voice replied, saying we hadn't paid for a room and that one of us needed to come down to the lobby to pay for it. Immediately, red flags went off in my head, as I knew his claim wasn't true. I had witnessed our coach pay for the room not even 2 hours ago. Why would they have given us room keys if we hadn't paid for it? Plus, even if something had gone wrong with the payment, it would have been super unprofessional to call the room this late into the night. I replied to the man saying that we had paid for the room, but completely ignoring my statement, the man once again insisted that just one of us had to come down as our room wasn't paid for. His voice, now clearly frustrated, then followed the claim up with a threat, saying that if we didn't send one person down, there would be consequences. Now, I'm a pretty paranoid person, and the whole thing felt so wrong to me. There was no way I was letting any of us go down to the lobby. I replied to the man, saying that we would be staying in our room until someone came to escort us out, and hung up the phone. I figured that if that really was someone from the hotel, they would either come up to our room or just resolve the situation in the morning. I told the others that I got a really bad feeling from the dude and explained to them what happened. Thankfully, they all agreed that there was no chance we hadn't paid and that it was basically unheard of for a hotel front desk to call you in your room this late. Of course, we were all on edge but decided to forget about it and just go to sleep. No one came to kick us out, but through the night, the phone to the room did ring a few more times. The next morning, we told our coach about the situation, and he asked the person working at the front desk about it and if his payment for the room didn't go through. But to our horror, they had no idea what we were talking about and even insisted that the front desk would not have called us that late into the night. They agreed to check the security cameras to see if they could find anything, but for the rest of our time there, we never heard back from them. Luckily, though, nothing else ever ended up happening to us. This whole situation was really disturbing and has left me with a lot of questions like, who called us? Why did they want one of us to exit the room alone in the middle of the night? And how did they know what room we were in? Honestly, the more I think about it, the more creeped out I get. But I'm just glad we decided to stay in our room that night.